coordinating the programs this year, and he is away on a family business and extends his greetings to all of you. I know he would like to be here, and a good friend of Byron's, and sorry he's missed the trip here. But we're delighted that you could all be here today, and we're delighted that we have Byron Reeves with us down from Stanford to give our presentation today. Byron got his PhD at Michigan State. You were there from 1972 to 1975.
Yeah, 5 or 6, yeah.
We overlapped for a year. My last year there was 1972, so I do remember some experiences, but we won't go into those.
No. You were the older, wiser.
Yeah, right.
Still are.
It's amazing how life changes, isn't it? The reverse of some things. When he finished his degree, he went to Wisconsin for a number of years, there from 1976 through 1985. And then from Wisconsin, he went to Stanford and has been at Stanford from 85 to the present, when he has the Paul C. Edwards Chair in Communication in the Department of Communication. In addition to being a faculty member there, he also holds a couple of other important responsibilities. One is that he's the director of the Center for Language and Study of Language and Information, which focuses on social and cognitive and computing sciences in the areas of communication. He also co-founded the Media X program at Stanford 2 or 3, 4 years ago. If you can see on his PowerPoints here, he has a little Media X science on them. Yes, exactly. Well labeled there. Byron's had a very distinguished career. As a number of you probably know, he was elected an ICA Fellow a number of years ago. And perhaps even more important, he has an Outstanding Alumni Award, maybe the Alumnus Award, from Michigan State University. I think people know a lot about his published work in this room. Perhaps the best known is the media equation that he published with Cliff Nass. We had Cliff down here a number of years ago, shortly after the book came out, to give a talk about it. And also, he wrote a book with Bob Hawkins on the effects of mass communication. It's published more than 60 journal articles and book chapters over the years, and been really very involved in a variety of different communication events, both at Stanford and in the communication discipline. He's going to talk today to us about science, about fun, psychological responses to games and interactive media. And I told Byron that when I leave just a couple minutes before 1 o'clock, it's not because he either ought to stop or I'm uninterested in what he's saying, but that I have class. And Janet has agreed to coordinate our discussion for us. So, Byron, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you. So Peter told me 30 minutes ago that I sent him a 2002 Vita, not the 2005 Vita. But it's really amazing when you get to be 55 how it doesn't matter. 3 years. There are a couple of journal articles, but I remember the time when I was in the place of probably many of you when you did it once a week, and every little step along the way to journal science was something that you needed to recognize. But in any case, thanks for the introduction. It's really very nice to be here. Some familiar faces, Stanford colleagues, students, and people I've met. I was reminded on the drive-in that I actually interviewed for a job here in 1981. I haven't thought about that for a long time, but whatever I felt before that presentation, this one feels a lot better and a lot more fun. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some current research that has to do with the power of interactive media to create experiences that are really fun. That's the street term. That create attention, involvement, engagement. Those are some of the scientific areas that I'm interested in. But I want to talk a little bit first about some preliminaries with respect to the research I'm going to show. I'm going to cover a broad range of current and recent findings. So old and new is a theme here. So I'm going to talk a lot about old and new data. I actually want to reprise what Cliff might have told you whenever that was 3 or 4 years ago, thinking about fundamental social responses to media. I'm still interested, and we are generally interested in the lab, not in the entree to these psychological processing issues, not via a particular medium or content area, although there's an important recent footnote on that. But we look at what is similar about, interactive games or old versions of television or pictures in newspapers or whatever. So a lot of different media, old and new, and obviously old and a lot of new researchers, students that are participating in these studies, and I'll mention them as we go along. So the mindset that's useful in thinking about the research that I'm going to talk about is this notion of primitive responses. I'll say more about this after a little bit more introduction to the general orientation, but you guys can't quite see this, but it's when the people turn from you and I, very adult-like, sitting in chairs watching all this stuff, to really basic responses constrained by evolution that happen because our brains are old, and we have no other way of responding to the current environment other than to use those old brains. So that's the focus here, and that's kind of the mindset. And I'm interested in taking this orientation, this primitive psychology, especially into features of interactivity, and especially into studying interactive games. And I'll say more about that as we go. So why are they fun? Why is this revolution in interactivity in the context of game entertainment, why is that so compelling? And then another caveat is this is actually, I'm at a decision point actually in a presentation right now whether to really emphasize this or this because I don't know, this seems to happen as you get older and as an academic, but this becomes more and more interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this after I talk about some of the basic research. Okay, so this is the reprise. This is the general orientation that we're really taking to media. It is a fundamentally different notion of how people respond to media. It's psychological and it's extremely social, and is really thinking about computing and all the things that interactive media can do today, not so much as a tool with criteria such as productivity and efficiency, the main criteria, but with social, emotional responses as the fundamental response. The thought that I'm actually in dialogue with a social actor, or I'm in a social place or a physical space. And that's the main orientation right here. And that's and I'll acknowledge also Peter did Cliff Nass, my colleague at Stanford, and this is an orientation that we began in the mid-90s as we were thinking about what in the heck was similar about television, which I was studying, and computing, which Cliff was studying. Now, well, there are some pictures in both, there's some interactive opportunities in both, there are some fundamental differences, but not taking the industrially constrained definition of these two different sets of companies and sets of uses, but really trying to look across all of these different uses. Okay, so fundamentally, human media interaction is social, emotional, real, the same as real interactions. That's this notion. So the reprise, the major entree into this is to go through an example of how this might be true. So first of all, pretend you believe this is true. Okay, no evidence yet unless you've looked at the book. So for those that haven't looked at any of this, pretend you believe this is true. There are some really interesting implications of that. One implication is that, the main one, is that everything I know about this relationship, which is a big place in the library, it's over in the psych department, social psychology, a lot of information known about this relationship, cross Peter out, substitute this, that I can now know a lot about this relationship by taking a look in the library in places where people that are contributing to that literature have no idea that this might possibly be relevant to human-technology interaction. So it's a theft. It's really seeing how far we can go with this notion of crossing out one of the humans in the human-human relationship and really substituting things that are objectively artificial. We've got these old brains that are have a problem in believing that all the time, but they're objectively artificial. So we can steal important lessons, and this is a fun one. Some of you may have heard Cliff ask you this. If you have heard him ask this, you have to give me the same answer you would have given him. All right, here's a social rule. You go to the library in social psych and you say, well, politeness is important in interpersonal discourse. You know, people go to great extremes to make others feel comfortable. And one social rule, you can find lots of evidence. This is not a social rule you learn in kindergarten or read in a how-to manual. This is something that people naturally do. Be polite to those people that ask questions about themselves. This is something we generally do. So this is not my rule or a how-to rule. Remember, this is social psychology. It's in the literature. Okay, so let's apply that rule. How do you like the talk so far? It's good, yeah. Yeah, I hope it's good, yeah. Out in the hallway, how did you like the talk? What you will find from the literature, more variance in the responses, they'll bias more negative, because you don't have to actually confront the person that's asking the question about themselves. So you don't have to be polite. So this is an example of a social rule. Is it a social rule we can steal to think about this relationship? And that's what this sample experiment right at the beginning here is about. Okay, so imagine the following experiment. We're going to test and see if this is the case. Okay, we've got this computer, and it's got lots of information in a tutoring scheme. It's going to tell me about love and relationships, technology topics, a whole breadth of information. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to work with this tutor. And a voice and pictures are going to tell me information in all these different categories. Okay, now we have to do the experiment and break the room in half. This half of the room over here is now going to be asked by that same computer how this computer did as a teacher of, and then fill in the blank with the different topic areas. This half of the room over here, when they come into the experiment, there's tutoring here, then we wheel your chair over here, and a second computer asked, how did that computer do as a teacher of technology, love, and relationships? Okay, so that's the experiment, pretty much similar to me asking you how I'm doing versus someone else asking you how I did out in the hallway. And then the question is, how does the theft go? Does it work? When the same computer asks how it did as a tutor, that computer, or the people that are responding to that computer, the tutoring was better, the interaction was more likable. Actually, the list is even longer than this. People thought they learned more. On average, they estimated they got 2 out of 25 questions more right in the response in the objective exam that they had to take after they did that. They responded politely to a hunk of junk. And then, now we can say, well, who were they? Well, the people, maybe it was done at a time when people didn't know enough about computing, or they were novices, or they didn't truly understand that this was a hunk of junk and fluorescent light and things that were programmed and whatnot. So the experiment had to be replicated. It had to be replicated in several ways. So one way it was replicated, just to show the commonness of this, let's get some CS students at Stanford. They should know that it's okay to totally insult or say whatever you want to this machine. They didn't. Same response. We did it working with a bunch of HP engineers in Singapore and a couple other places with bench scientists we did this not with a computer, but with a machine, an oscilloscope, that actually had a dialogue about how the oscilloscope was measuring sine waves. And guess what? If it's more polite, the sine waves are actually more accurate. So, I mean, something fundamental is going on here. And what we do argue is, and this is mostly in the book and developed somewhat since then, and this is the undercurrent for all of that comes out in the visual areas that I'm interested in. This is really common. It's not something that happens just with kids, just with novices, just with people who aren't willing to think hard enough. It happens to all of us, at least at some time. We have no doubt you could think your way around this. You could say, wait, I mean, Reeves just told me this was, a bunch of silicon. I'm going to insult the hell out of it. You can think your way around that. But when you default to the normal style of discourse or normal energy level for interaction, it applies to all of us. It doesn't depend on any fancy equipment, although that's an interesting augmentation of this possibly for the future. But it applies in these very simple interactions. So you don't have to. It doesn't mean that to get this response you've got to be immersed in virtual reality goggles. It doesn't mean that at all. And it's most interestingly something that it's almost impossible to be introspective about. I can't say, tell me about why you were polite to the computer. People have no memory, no information, no concept that they'd actually done this. And when confronted with it, would say, well, that's silly. I obviously didn't do that. So this is automatic. It's unconscious. And then that gets us, well, first one bit of information on why that's the case, and then how do you actually assess this? If it is unconscious and automatic, you can do some of the clever social psych kinds of experiments, but you've got to do some other stuff as well. So the summary on why this happens is that close counts. The rudimentary forms of interactivity and contingency that we get in this relationship right here. We take turns. It changes in relation to my input. It's got faces. It's got a voice. It may gesture. It tells me a story. It does all these things. That's enough for the human brain to really to respond as if it's true. And the human brain, there's no switch in the brain that's saying, okay, media, I'll route the processing over here, or reality, route the processing over here. So we're not specialized for this stuff. We're evolved over hundreds of thousands of years for this stuff. And then that's what's actually dominating in these relationships. So new media and the even more grander notions of interactivity are engaging old brains. Okay, so the research that I want to talk about is in a particular domain of response. It's all over the place with respect to media, with a little bit of an emphasis on gaming, but it's all over. It's concentrated with respect to the response, and it's arousal, emotional responses to media, to forms of interactivity, and to ways information is presented. So that's kind of the corral for the data that I'll talk about, and especially these arousal responses. And I'm thinking about emotional responses, not in the sense of, gee, I feel bad today, or my mood over the last week is a little depressed, or I'm thinking about the momentary activity that is involuntary and automatic, that requires your attention to certain parts of the environment, that energizes your thinking, that keeps you engaged, that is a call to your body. Get ready. You might have to do something. Peter, get ready. You might have to leave the room. You might have to approach me. So it's those kinds of calls. It's that automaticity. And when you're interested in that category of responses, as I mentioned, it's really hard to say, tell me what your autonomic response system was doing as I walked toward you. And how, and the software calls in your brain to redirect blood flow to your limbs, which may be needed to fend off an attack. I mean, it's that level of response that never just gets bottled up inside the body, never to be let out into grander thought, by the way. That's an important part of this. It's not just leaving the room. It's actually deciding, having an evaluation of that experience or the larger things. But when you say that introspection is difficult, the responses are important, hard to know about them. Well, how can we know about them? You've got to buy into different methods. And that's one of the things that I did a long time ago, was say, okay, if the equivalent of if you want to study French literature, you've got to learn French, and if you want to study the body, you're going to have to figure out some way to get a window on the mind and the body that is beyond just talking. So all of this research, and I'm going to gloss this a bit, but all of these studies are done in the context of established physical recording of body signatures in relation to media stuff. So we're looking at body and brain. The body stuff is attaching electrodes to your skin to measure the amount of moisture that is being created, which is related to autonomic spikes or spikes of electricity in your body that are caused by these automatic responses. It's looking at whether your heart is accelerating or decelerating, which it's doing all the time. And I don't mean, you know, getting up to 150 beats per minute on a treadmill. I mean actual more momentary changes that signify something interesting psychologically. So that's what we're doing. And then we're also, and this is a brand new foray based on an NSF grant that is a huge NSF grant that is great, just great to have, that's taking us into actually looking at activation in the brain and into, and I'm sure you guys have seen various images of different regions in the brain that light up when different things happen, and so we're into that as well. I'm going to mention one thing quickly about this, which is really a bunch of psychophysio syllables in there, but it's really useful if you ever, this is as much for the students. I think about the students who look at this stuff and say, that's really interesting. Wouldn't it be great to present a figure like that? And I'll never be able to do it because I just don't want to learn French, or I don't want to go over to the fMRI center and bother the docs to find out what it is that you actually have to do to get a picture of a brain. And I want to, so I'm going to say this, so the message, if you're thinking that, is you can do this. We can do this. It's not that hard. It's not any harder than a 3-course stat sequence. Now, 10 years ago, it was really hard and really expensive. It's just not, it's not impossible. Did you think the 3-course stat sequence is really hard? Or that sounded like a big barrier to entry? Okay. I mean, it's at least that. It's not free. You don't, there's no fMRI for dummies yet, but there's some things that are close. So this right here, if you're interested, so physiological psychology has to do with which of these is a dependent variable and which is the independent variable. These guys are interested in what happens in your brain that makes you think X and Y. Or what happens in your body that makes you think this. So independent variable, dependent variable. These guys, this is a much cheaper notion. This is what we're doing right here. A much cheaper notion of this body signature. It's if you're really interested in this, in something, you get this signature in the body. And isn't that convenient? I don't really care why. I mean, I do care why, but it's not the essence of the use of the method to understand what's happening among all the different, in the different synapses and the neuronal level of this. You don't have to understand that. You just need to know that if you experience pain, you get activation right here. And then you can say, well, here's some media that's painful, and here's a different version of the media that's painful. And then we can see which one lights up more. And that's really, I mean, I don't want to overestimate the simplicity, but for those that might be interested in knowing the differences in those two different pictures you might show people, it is doable. So this is what we are right here, psychophysiologists, and are just really interested in where are the rulers, the yardsticks? Who owns the yardsticks? What are they that we can grab them and go and put them in different people's minds, or hook somebody up in a way that we can use that yardstick to figure out what's going on. Okay, so now what I want to do is just give you a tour through some of the stuff that we've done, old and new, that uses that sensibility to try to look at different features of interactivity that you might not think of, you might not discover if you were talking to people or looking at other traditional ways of doing experimentation with media. So this is one of the oldest things that in fact, this one, there's of any little piece of data, everybody must have some little piece of data that they at least think or imagine changed their career. This is mine. Okay, this one's a little old, but we had about an hour of video that included television commercials. These are 3 frames out of a television commercial. Had programs, had some quiz programs and some situation comedy, drama, and whatnot. And what we had was an hour-long record brain electrical activity. This is the electroencephalogram, the EEG response. So these are electrodes, in our case only 4. If you've ever had a clinical diagnosis, you might have had 16 put on your head. But we had this little time series that matched all the changing pictures. And this was in a time when it was difficult to actually get this and this in the same room, but we actually were able to actually sync it up enough. And we started looking at, so here's this record. There's one thing hard to know about this record right here. So this is the amount of electrical activity in a certain frequency, the alpha frequency of your brain, which the physiologists say is related to how hard you're thinking. That's there's a lot behind that, but that should do right now. And the only hard thing about looking at this is if the number is high, it means you're not thinking much because you're not suppressing this certain wavelength. If the number is low right here, that means, whoa, this is really high attention here, here, and here, really high attention. Okay, so low attention right here. So first thing we did was actually just look at this. I mean, forget time series analysis for a second. You know, that was a nice tool that worked its way in here, but let's just look. Geez, this actually turns out to be almost 20 standard deviation drop. What the hell was going on there? Well, the thing that was going on there is we changed from this scene to this scene. There was a huge visual orientation as indicated by the signature of cortical activity that happened when pictures changed. Well, that's interesting. Boy, we didn't, you know, the film editors and film theorists have often said that the cut is a really important fundamental psychological unit. Well, you know, if this record right here is important, then that cut is maybe, you know, here's evidence that it's really worth looking at. And just to finish that story, it is really worth looking at. Guess what? Guess where memory is the best? If you pick these pictures out across the hour and you look, this picture is much more likely to be remembered accurately and quickly than this picture because attention's low right here and attention's high rate. So it's not just this, you know, some ancient electrical burst in your brain. It's consequential. I mean, you could even extrapolate that into learning pretty easily. And by the way, here's exactly where the branding audio message occurred in this particular ad for Cudahy brand sausage. You know, probably in about, so you can also get a feel for some of the applications of this particular kind of diagnosis of a message. But here was something else interesting happening right here. So it remained really low right at the beginning. And let me just tell you what was happening right at the start of this message. So the ad starts with this shady-looking tube, apparently at the end of a table that was still for a couple seconds, I think up till about 2 seconds right here, and then it starts rolling. So imagine a table imagine I picked this table up right here, here's the sausage, and it's coming right for you. There is no z-axis physically in the television image, but there's certainly a three-dimensional representation in video, and it is rolling right toward you. And as long as it's rolling right toward you, your attention is really high, and the minute it stops and freezes, you know, the attention goes down, based on this record right here. And so we can also look at memory, and we can look at this cadence of, I mean, the type of attention we're talking about right here is impossible to maintain at a peak level for 30 seconds. This is attention. The window of time, the psychology of these responses is 6 to 10 seconds. So when the psychophysiologists talk about emotion, they're talking about that amount of time, not how you feel this afternoon. A very important definition of emotion, because it's a very significant definition in terms of things like learning and memory and how you attend to what's going on. So this was one of the first things. There's something primitive happening here. This is a picture, but just like the social responses to the computer asking about itself, I'm not evolved to discount this. This thing is coming right for my face, and my brain is evolved to load the software to think about doing something. And I'll talk a little bit more about those responses. So that was one of the first ones. I'm going to move in time a little bit here. So you go to the library and you find, well, what else is significant at that level of primitive response? Well, one thing that turns out to be, these are really basic things, they're not little nuances. One thing that's very significant is how big is that which is in front of you. How big is the person? How many of them are there? How close are they to you? What sense of size do you have? And you can, in an evolutionary sense, you can think about this in terms of threat. So we said, well, gee whiz, you know, digital video, you can show the same DVD on any one of these screens right here. I wonder if that's different. So this is not a content issue. In fact, the last one was not a content issue. If you asked a bunch of advertising professors to talk about, or me before these data, to talk about that sausage ad, they would have talked about, the branding message and the fact that they were trying to create a homey country feel by the sausage frying in the pan there. This was actually taken off of a local TV station in Wisconsin, so it was sausage was a big item there, but it wasn't something you'd naturally talk about. So one of the things here in thinking about display size, nothing to do with the content. Okay, this is just the structure of this and how it might influence it. So we said, well, can we take similar arousal responses? In this case, it was skin conductance measures. These are, the guys in the lab, so you should see this. A lot of this physio stuff, and this is again for the students. This is even easier. This is 10 weeks and $10,000, and you're into this research. Okay, so here's an RA that just left, Kevin Wise, in a lab. We're looking at images of different size, and the subject has a couple of electrodes coming off of silver cup electrodes that are glued to your hand. So this is really pretty easy stuff to do. And a couple of interesting things happen here. So when you get the 6-foot picture diagonal, same content throughout this experiment. Here's picture onset right here at second 6, and this is actually about the size of the emotional response. So you can see the time duration of this emotional response. This large screen right here, really significantly larger responses. So these are, this is the amount of electrical activity that's actually passing between the two electrodes, and it can max out at a volt. And we just measure how much of that volt is actually conducted through the skin. This is really a lot more arousing. Same content. And there's some very interesting things to say about that with respect to the fact that a clear majority of television sets now are in the over 45 inches, which is actually a dramatic change quickly. And so the arousal level, and this is arousal without respect to content. So this is on top of whatever you get for blood and guts and sex and all the content that itself can cause these kinds of responses. It's just the structure. And the other interesting thing that we're actually pursuing right now is this wasn't so interesting actually when we gathered these data because there were a few handheld TVs, but this is really interesting now with telephones that can display images and play DVDs and games and whatnot. So these small screens right here. This is this difference between, this is the green line right here, this size screen right here, 2-inch picture height. This is a highly significant difference in and of itself relative to a 20-inch screen where the face is more or less the same size that it would be if the person was sitting next to you in real life. So that's the familiar one. The low one right here, these yellow boxes, that's the least arousing. Most, second, and this one's very interesting because of the novelty, the surprise value of seeing miniature figures. So we've got a student now that's just working on the concept of miniaturization. Why is that so engaging? And everything from doll houses to model trains to Chucky movies, all kinds of small things do have a fascination. They have a novelty about them that has a physical counterpart. Okay, the tour continues here. Here's a 2 or 3 month old study about a fundamental piece of new media that really is turning out to be extremely interesting with regard to these physical responses. And it's just the simple opportunity we have to initiate visual experiences by clicking a mouse, by clicking a remote control button. When I watch this computer show me images, like I sit back there like you're doing right now, I'm doing the clicking, you're just sitting there watching. That's a passive, well, we would talk about it, I think, if we even were being introspective. That's a passive response. Somebody else is in control. If you got to click forward images of me showing slides, the question was, what's different about that experience? Same content, exact same content, but you get to change the slides. You get to advance the video of me or whatever the counterpart of that would be. When you get to click, so this is an experiment where I'll set it up for you. It's a very primitive one. We want to make generalizations to a lot of stuff, but it's a primitive experiment where you're responding to. One of the things we do in this emotional research is collect databases of stuff. So we've got picture sets and video clips and whatnot that are across a vast array of different kinds of emotional experience. So we're showing you a bunch of these still pictures, and they're on a computer. And they're in a matrix, and they're kind of grayed out, and you get to click on different ones, and you're told that the task here is to make judgments about the quality of the photography. So we've kind of taken you away from or given you a reason to be there other than just to generate a physical signature. When you get to click, it's a lot more arousing for both neutral and especially for emotional pictures than when you watch the computer on its own time, in a way that's relatively similar than most people would do, anyway. But when the computer's in control, the arousal level is measured by the number of these spikes of autonomic activity is less. So the mere clicking, I'm now actively taking part in this experience. And then the other interesting part about this is what happens to your heartbeat. Because this is a wonderful signature of how you're responding to a lot of this psychology. So when I'm watching somebody else's stuff, when you're watching mine, a new picture causes a visual orienting response. This is a useful response for humans because it's just an evaluative response. Oh, what's that? Should I be interested in that? Is it something I should approach or avoid? Just what is it? What's its relevance to me? And when you're in that, you're not actually saying those things because you're not aware you're having this orienting response. But when that happens, your heart decelerates. It slows down. And this is counterintuitive. Somebody comes in the room right now, and everybody's heart is going to slow down 1 to 3 beats per minute. And it's an evaluative posture. Its blood flow's changing. It's maximizing the attention on that and focus on evaluation. When I'm taking active control in my environment, like when I've decided what that is. So this is in the time sequence. This is after the evaluation. I've decided what that is. I'm either getting the hell out of here. I'm approaching it. I'm going to do something. Heart rate accelerates, and that's exactly what we get on either clicking or not. So another very primitive aspect of interactivity, clicking. If any of you have any comments, questions, or anything as we go, I forgot to offer this. I'm happy to talk about it with respect to any of these things that interest you or that you pick up on as we go through here. Yeah. What constitutes emotion is just this physical signature. Oh, emotional here. These are pictures. I mean, we literally have about 1,000 of them that have been judged in a number, so that have been put into this space there's an arousal axis and a valence axis, and they've been put in this space according to judgments that people have made, introspective judgments. Do you think this is highly arousing or calm, or is it positive or negative? And also based on the physical signature of responses to that over a bunch of studies. It's a picture set that is shared by about 20 different labs, which is another really cool aspect of this research. You can compare studies a lot more easily when you have stimulus sets to look at, or that are standardized. That standardize a bunch of studies, but it's those two judgments, and it's maintained by Peter Lang at the University of Florida. And we have made, there's a picture database, we made a moving video counterpart to that. We've got about 300 6-second video clips of everything from daisies growing by the roadside to gory surgery. So we've got moving images that are in that. So that's actually an important part of the research. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. We're going to get a little bit more into talking about some game stuff right here. This is a study that led by Annie Lang, who is actually Peter Lang's daughter, who studied with me at the University of Wisconsin and is now at Indiana University. And just became Dean of Research there, which is really... Peter knows Annie Lang, and he's thinking, that's really interesting. Okay, so Annie is very much involved in this arousal area. So we're asking some other basic things. Well, killing people, gee whiz, that's what that's being talked about a lot. And this is a little bit more common with respect to interest in violence and games. And I realize, by the way, I don't know, you may not realize this being here on this campus, but if you only find out about USC from things that you read in the press, you would think that there's really a lot of gaming and game interest in this university. You guys have done extremely well across the school and film and everywhere. I mean, it's really kind of astounding, actually. So I realize I'm speaking about games in the context of folks that actually are very interested and know a lot about them. But an interest here, quickly, in the difference between killing and stalking. Okay, there's a literature in the library that you can go to find out about how that works, and it works about the same way in the games. So this is arousal levels during the course of 6 minutes of violent gameplay, first-person shooter gameplay. And it's arousal to components of the stalking versus the killing. This line that goes up right here over the course of 6 minutes is the killing. Goes up. It gets more arousing over the course of 6 minutes. I mean, you can think about 2 hours all week during my adolescence, and I don't know how exactly it accumulates, but as opposed to, and we don't have a real-world counterpart for that because it's impossible to hook people up with electrodes while they go out and kill people, but the stalking part of this is really very important with respect to the arousal. I mean, you're actually tiring a bit as this is going on. So when you do this in the context of a story, go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, what does it mean 6 minutes? Because there's no gameplay where you're constantly killing for 6 minutes in a row.
It's people killed in minute 1 versus minute 2 versus minute 3 during the gameplay.
Okay, so it's ongoing gameplay?
Yes, yeah. I'm first person walking through all the hallways and peeking around to see if anybody's there. And then, so we're matching the responses to the moment that you do the behavior. So going around the corner, what's the arousal level there versus actually shooting one of the players? Yeah, yeah. So these responses are tightly coupled actually with the data. And I'm gonna speed up a little here to make sure I get through the whole of this, so we can keep discussing. So we do have till 1:30. Is that right? I'm going to start looking at my watch here. So if the discussion comes in as we're talking, that's great. When you put this killing in the context of a narrative, what happens? So forget just the first person, wham bang. What about? And I had actually. So this is in the context of Outlaws and Half-Life. So there's I won't read the description of it, but Half-Life is you're in this facility that's being overtaken by aliens, and you're actually put into a story that kind of makes sense. A lot more arousing in the context of the narrative, which you might also imagine because it creates a greater sense of realism. I mean, in real life, if you know the story behind different people that you're interacting with, that certainly happens. This was a study that we did on highly negative images in the context of television news. So we're out of games now and back to information content.
Can I just ask you something?
Yeah.
Because it kind of contradicts what you said earlier, that the content is not the most important thing. What the narrative brings into the whole picture here is some sort of content.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to set up a competition between content and structure. I mean, they're both important.
Yeah, but do you have any idea how they interact or how they play
I
together?
mean, well, yes, structure can certainly change content and vice versa. It's almost like nature, nurture. Both are true, and how they interact is a lot more interesting than, which one is 60 and which one is 40. So you can get, if I cut a political advertisement with fast-paced edits, take the same 30 seconds of visuals and cut it with fast-paced cuts versus longer scenes, I can change the perception of dynamism of the candidate in the ad. Okay, so structure influences content. But we also saw that narrative, when you put structure in the context of narrative, the effect goes the other way. So both directions, both are very important, but any complete theory of how it works needs to consider both. So that's really the message from these data. One's not more important than the other. I think structure is the one that's not thought of as much. Maybe a little less so now that we all seem to be a little bit more involved in naively in the production of structure, so we have a better sense maybe of how that's happening, in part because of games and the opportunity to construct our own visuals and whatnot. But both are very important. Okay, so this is what about the highly negative stuff? And this is not an arousal study, but the effect of the arousal on memory. So what we did is create a bunch of news stories where we've got somebody presenting the news, and we've got a picture of the news with a distant image of the disaster versus a very proximate image of blood and guts, of really compelling negative material, and then back to a commentator talking about the news. So we got lots of content presented here, here, and here, and now we're going to ask you, what do you remember from watching this 2-minute segment right here? And when the image is not terribly negative, you get this yellow line, and the percentage of information remembered in the 3 segments of the news story are about the same. When you include this really compelling negative blood and guts imagery in the middle section, so Dan is talking over, there's an audio over this negative news right here, something very interesting happens. First of all, you forget stuff that you've already seen. And this is 2 months later. This is really interesting because it's not in the lab just right after viewing. You forget stuff that you've already seen, and you're more likely to remember information presented here. So this is a retroactive interference. You're not rehearsing it. It's kind of got, you're erasing the tape. And this was a wake-up call, this highly negative stuff, a wake-up call to the system to process here. All right, I got a couple more here. This is a very recent study on yelling and screaming, being uncivil, which is mostly attributed to television news and especially political debate formats and firing line and content like that. But it is also certainly part of audio in games and lots of other media. So this was a very interesting study because the stimulus for this study really took a great effort to produce. We had a major production where we created a debate between 2 candidates across 8 issues that lasted for 20 minutes. These are congressional candidates done as a professional 4-camera shoot that was done twice. One version, these guys read a prompter, reading a prompter, had a debate where they were saying the same words, always saying reading the exact words off the prompter, but being uncivil, yelling, screaming, interrupting a little bit. So you start your speech before the other one has actually finished. Some scowling, some uncivil additions to that presentation in one version and not to the other version. So we actually did it twice. And then what we did, so we had uncivil and civil, and this is, the uncivil one, these are the arousal levels over the course of 8 minutes. Each of the different stories were averaged over 8 minutes. So arousal goes down after the onset of anything, as you can see this. So this is a longer, more tonic response here, but it's going down. But arousal, this uncivil dialogue is physically arousing. So you get this involuntary response here. And you also get it even more if the framing is right here in the debate versus right here in the debate. So here's if the framing is like this versus actual close-ups of the people. So you get, there's a content and structure, or mostly a structure change. But it's kind of the paralinguistic cues really can influence the responses. And you get all kinds of bleed out from this into attitudes about politics, where the candidates stood on the issues. So it's not just only a primitive response. Yes, sir?
How are you operationalizing arousal? Is it only a physiological
yes.
measure, or is it a verbal self-report?
In this collection of stuff, it's only, it's primarily is a physical response of the body. Within a literature that has, said if you hook the electrodes here, measure it like this, this is an important signature of the awakening of processing systems. We also ask people.
And is there a high correlation between self-reporting or being aroused and physiological?
Yeah, I mean, the actual correlation is about 0.3. So there's a ton of error in the relationship. There's a ton of unexplained variance. So we think we're really getting a lot of additional information by going to the length of actually looking at the physical signature. But you get people seeing the negative images in the news, and they use their hands and they go ooh, and you can kind of see them and they'll remember that. But you also get lots of these responses that people really, it would be difficult to remember. You want to really tag that memory to a specific point in the media, and it's really very hard. So this is physical stuff. I mean, that's what that really bounds the research, is really an interest in finding out what the body does. All right, let me do a couple more studies here that are a little bit more into some contemporary issues with games, and keep the questions coming here. So one of the really interesting things with respect to this involuntary response that we've been thinking about in the last year is the difference between an encounter I have on this computer with something I believe to be controlled by a computer versus an encounter I have with a representation on this computer that I believe to be controlled by another human being. And in the literature here, the avatar, my avatar is something I control as a human being. I have this character in this game. That's mine, and I'm in control of it. An agent is controlled by a computer, and that's my awareness of this. And so this has actually turned out to be a really interesting part of gaming, by the way, which is you can't quite see this real, but there's a bunch of players in a multiplayer online role-playing game, and there are both, by the way, avatars and agents in this scene right here. In other words, there are other players who I know because maybe they're members of my guild. I've talked to them offline. But there are also computer-controlled agents in this game that are there based on the game designers' intuitions about what would make for interesting gameplay. Well, we started out not in this game, although that's where we're going to this year, but in a very simple type of game. So this is a game right here with a joystick. And you've got to be, the reason you start out simple here is because this information about neural activation associated with different experiences is while people are in a magnetic resonance imaging device, which is, if you've ever had that done to you, you lie down on a sliding on a sled and you're put into this large magnet and it's pounding away and you're in this dark space right here. So we've got to have something you can do while you're in the magnet to be able to look at different brain activation areas. So here's the game right here. It's one of two versions. It's actually the same thing both times, but we tell people two different things. Here's your dot right here. This is you. You've got this joystick, and you can control this dot. And this dot in condition 1, this other dot, is a computer. And the computer is going to move that dot around however it wants to, and your job in this game is to follow the dot. That's condition 1. Condition 2 is, here's you, here's your dot, and this other dot right here is controlled by Frank in the other room. I don't know if it was actually said it was Frank, but so it's an avatar. It's actual. There's a human being that I've now told you is associated with this other dot right here. And lo and behold, when you are told that this dot, which has, it has no no ability to represent the human that actually controlling it at all, when you're told that's controlled by another person, you get activation in brain areas associated with self-other connectedness, with empathy for other people. This is a very real experience just because you think it's another person, not because it looks like another person, but because you think there's agency, there's agency here that and controlled by another human being. So this is a really important initial finding that now we can move into more media-rich areas, and that's what we're doing here. So if you think that you're dealing with, in the games, they're known as NPCs, the non-player characters, responses are very different than if you actually think that it's an avatar controlled by another player. So that was an interesting look that got us in. Oh, here's a picture of the magnet. I forgot that was on here. That got us into thinking about, let's go from the simple stimuli to much more rich stimuli. Okay, a couple other things with the games and the avatars. This has been very interesting kind of primitive response here. One of the things that you get to do in these games that people often talk about as being one of the reasons they are compelling is you get to choose what you're going to look like. And there's a whole ton of and I'm sure a lot of you have done this. This is World of Warcraft, a very popular new game right now. And we did something very simple. In World of Warcraft, you can go in and you will spend hours maybe constructing your character, how it's going to be dressed and what region you're from and what skills and powers you have and what armor you're going to wear and facial hair and gender and just sliders, and you can do all kinds of stuff. We simplified that. We said you're going to play a bit of this game, World of Warcraft, in one of two ways. The first way is, here are 4 characters. They vary by gender and appearance and whatnot. Choose one. Okay, you chose one. Now let's play. The other version of that in the experiment was, here's your character. We didn't even show you these other 3. Here's your character. So it's an assignment, just a random assignment of one of the characters. During the first 4 minutes, this is as far as we've gotten. These results are last week, so that's kind of cool, and this is ongoing right now. 4 minutes into the game, the arousal level associated with the gameplay of walking up to other characters, exploring different places, is highly, significantly greater when you got to choose. So that's really me there. So this is the other direction. So I'm invested in that character. So then you can think about how that might evolve into a lot of the reputational issues that happen in these games, and I need to show up to do a raid with my guild tonight because they're counting on me and my reputation's at stake, and that's me in there, and they'll know I'm not that I let them down. So greater arousal associated with being able to choose your own character. And this is another one we did as part of the same data collection, which is another very interesting primitive difference in how you experience these games. And these don't show up terribly well, but there's this grunt here, this character in World of Warcraft, and I can confront the grunt with a number of different cameras that I can choose to be my eyes in the game. One is to make my eyes the camera. So when I show up to confront the grunt who's standing guard at some strange place in this world, I don't see myself. I don't have a peripheral vision sense of my body. I just have a first-person sense, and I'm looking right, eye to eye. Another thing I can do is I can have an over-the-shoulder view, which is probably I don't know if anyone has ever actually content analyzed this in gameplay, but from my watching, the predominant view that most people have. So the camera's over my shoulder, and it just follows me wherever I go, and I can see my back, and I can actually turn and see what my face looks like also, but it's over my back. So that's a third-person view. And then this third-person view has lots of different variations that we haven't even begun to experiment with yet. We can pull back the camera. We could actually have the camera, instead of be right behind me, it could be kind of out to the side. I wonder if that changes how aroused I am when I'm shot or stabbed. So that's kind of what we're looking at. But we know that this certainly is different here. There's not a whole lot of people, by the way, that choose this first person. But when you do, arousal is much higher when you're actually confronting these characters. And this could be just verbal exchange as well as physical contact when you're confronting them in first person versus a third person view. And the other interesting thing is that when you walk up to another person in first person view in real life right here, there is this classic orienting response, which is this deceleration of the heart. This is exactly what you get here in first person view. So when you get somebody who's got the cursor and he's moving around, or she's moving around, and she gets up to the grunt, right at that moment, start with the tachometer to see what the heart is doing, and this is what it's doing. It's decelerating over the course of seconds or beats post being in front of the grunt. In this view right here, you get something interesting happen. You get this action orientation. You get the acceleration of the heart when my character gets in front of the grunt. So there's not the need for personal evaluation. This is a little bit contrary to the choice data, but we're not quite certain what to make of this, but some really interesting implications of that I may be willing to do a little bit more with this character than I'd be willing to do with myself as this character. So this stuff, I know folks here study gaming. These are not my data, and they're just meant to say gaming is huge. Something's going on. Something's up there. It's incredibly involving. A lot of different new forms of media, a bunch of revenue. A lot of different people are playing a lot of different games. The demographics are changing to be less of a specialized, younger, male-oriented audience. People are spending tons of time here and also working. We've got examples in the last year of lots of people playing together, which is this extension of the psychological interest into the social interests. You know, we've got people that are experiencing all these primitive responses, but together. And we had almost 300,000 of them together in a single session on World of Warcraft in February, out of almost 1.5 million folks that are registered for that game now since last November, which is just really a pretty interesting evidence that this new medium is really taking off. So we've got lots of folks who are studying the exchange rates of game currencies for real dollars on eBay, and I'm sure you've all looked at how much a Wookiee costs on eBay and whatnot. And Star Wars Galaxy, so says my colleague Ted Castronova at Indiana. If you swap out on current eBay prices all of the value of characters and artifacts in Star Wars Galaxy, you get a per capita GMP that's about the 72nd largest economy in the world right now, so larger than Bulgaria. So something's going on, something's happening here. And what we're trying to do is think about the relevance of the psychological stuff. What do we make of this? We could do one of three things with all of that, or four. One of several things with a lot of the psychological stuff. One is we can, in a classic media effects sense, we could be better worriers about negative effects of games and these new forms of interactivity. We could help the entertainment industry do a better job. I think that's certainly possible. And it's even kind of interesting. And as evidenced by a lot of interests I know you folks have, and about a conference a week, we could try to use these games to do good stuff. Maybe teach people stuff, or give them experiences that they need that they don't have access to or won't sit through because they're boring. And we're actually working on one additional one. So this is just kind of in closing this to leave you in this applied area. This is a 5 minutes. I'm just going to let it play actually here. 5 minutes of my friend Helen Cheng and 40 of her friends, all level 60 players in World of Warcraft. Any World of Warcraft players here? You wouldn't admit it if you. There are on this campus. There are lots of them. Each one of these little pieces of green here is a separate person controlling an avatar in a game. They are organized into, they're all part of the same guild. They're organized into groups. The groups are represented in the health of the groups, and the abilities and expertise of the groups are represented over here. The map of, you can't quite see it, it's a video, and it looks wonderful on a VGA screen, I promise. A map of what's happening up here, different countdowns of different spells. This game is constructed so that, first it's constructed to maximize all the psychological stuff that I was talking about, I think. I mean, you can find everything, and you can find motion and color and media richness and shooting and different orientation changes and whatnot. But it's also a requirement to advance in the game. You have to cooperate. You are never given all of the expertise needed to kill this fire boss here. You can't do it on your own. If you chose to be a warrior, you better be traveling with a priest, so that when the fire boss whacks you, the priest can cast a spell and get you juiced back up and get into the fight again, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You just get lots of different layers of complexity here. You have got 6 different possibilities of IM and chat and voice IP during this raid right here. This is a raid, by the way, that requires at least a 7-hour commitment on the part of the 40 people to be successful. 7 hours. Working people to participate to be successful here. So it's just a huge media commitment. It may not be a whole lot more time than you'd spend watching television that week, which is, by the way, the medium that's getting trashed as a result of this. So you've got these 40 people. You've got these information channels here. This is actually a channel that's actually telling you what the status is of different spells and defenses of the fire bosses here they were trying to vanquish. All the words here are color-coded with respect to team leader instructions, people in my guild, people in my group. And you could just go on and on and on here about this incredibly rich collaborative environment. So when you talk now about technology to companies, so this is an ending that has nothing to do with the beginning of the talk. When you talk to companies that are interested in technology, what do they say their most important problem is? Their most important problem is collaboration. Most of the people that work for IBM today are not in their offices. The people at IBM are on average 8 different teams worldwide that had 3 different bosses. They're in jobs, they're in companies that are decentralized and democratized. Democratized in the sense of people get to work on whatever they want to work on. Not whatever, but that people get to choose much more than they did, and because of technology and this virtuality of work. We were at Cisco on Tuesday. The vice president of HR there said the #1 reason why we lose current and future employees to Google et al. Is that we don't have something cool that they think is cool to work on, and they leave. They'll just take off. Or if your project isn't cool within Cisco, I want to go work for her because she's got a cool project. So the thought I want to leave you with about a 4th category of relevance of this content to the real world is when you show this to executives who are trying to figure out how to coordinate expertise, that may be the most important thing that any of us have to do, and especially large enterprises have to do, is coordinating expertise. And when they see this, I'm not sure, I think I have one. When they see this, and they look at this, and then they look at the $10 million they just spent for this collaborative tool, or the $20 million they spent on it, or the $200 million they just spent on it, and they start thinking, this is really interesting for a lot of reasons. It's fun. It is current with respect to interests of employees, people who are younger and who are used to multitasking, used to constant feedback. If you tell me we're going to talk about this in my annual review next year, I'm out of here. I want to know how many points I have now and what level I'm at now. I need feedback that's in a seconds, minutes, on through a year form right here. So one other answer to the question of relevance, so in addition to learning and helping the entertainment industry and being better worriers, is to actually try to build some software or build places in these games where you can actually do serious digital work. And that's what we're working on now. So I'll show you one quick example. We've got about 5 more minutes here on my watch. So we're doing experiments. So in Star Wars Galaxies, this is another massive multiplayer game, Sony Online, right down the road here in close to San Diego. Several 100,000 players. Takes you a long time to get access to it. Any students here that want to know about what's happening in these games, or faculty that have tried, it's really hard because it's hard to get to these places. It's not like television. Here's a tape. Go look at it. You'll understand what the program is about. You pretty much have to hire people who are 100 hours into this to know where to go or what to see. So we did this experiment where you have to have a job in Star Wars Galaxy, and you have to sell stuff and buy stuff and contribute to the economy, or you're out. You get no points. One of the jobs is doctor. You become a physician. You can be a pharmaceutical manufacturer, weapons manufacturer, anything you want. So this doctor, you have to learn about, spend anywhere from 20 to 100 hours learning arbitrary information to actually get the status to where you can sell your products. One of the things you do, I'm going to skip here, one of the things you do is you analyze images related to the medical condition of other players in this wonderful visual environment. And what we did was an experiment where we took real medical information, real work that insurance agents or medical insurers are doing, trying to figure out whether this slice of a scan for testicular cancer actually is good stuff or bad stuff, and in the game give enough information for players to make a judgment, just a dichotomous judgment of whether this is cancer or not. It takes, and this is my last comment, it takes 30 Star Wars Galaxies players at an accuracy rate of 60%, which if you had to have any one of them as your doctor, boy, you'd be in deep trouble. But it takes about 30 of them to do better than an average pathologist in making a diagnosis. Now, hundreds of thousands of people play the game. The wisdom of crowds, the psychology of engagement, and then you start thinking about medical imaging, TSA baggage scans, factory inspections, find the bad guys at the Super Bowl. So in addition to collaboration, work that's really too easy, building that into games. So I'll just leave you that with that as kind of a tease on a direction that we're thinking about for the relevance of some of the reasons these games are engaging. Thanks. Yeah.
I'd first like to thank you for your presentation. It's incredibly rich. But what I'd like to do is to look at what seems to be a tension in evolutionary type thinking between competition and cooperation.
Yeah.
And most of the examples you use are cooperation, particularly from an aesthetic point of view. This is non-productive or utilitarian activity, as opposed to the individual tool used for a given end. And so why, when you're building the model, would you begin with the psychological when you could say that first 3 seconds of pause is looking for proprietary cues to figure out how or what kind of relationship is present or evolving here, as opposed to psychological information as to how I should react. That the initial impulse is cooperative as opposed to either flight or fight.
So right at the point where I started the video, I come at this with an interest in these psychological responses. Right at the point where you start thinking about the larger context here, it is totally accurate to say that I mean, it's not necessary that that is the only entree. It may even you may even in moments be misguided by a psychological entree to some of the cooperative and social things that are being done in these large groups of people. So at that point, you've bought into another level of analysis that may be, so it'd be as fruitful to enter that from, an interest in groups or networks or even a cultural interest for that matter. So that's absolutely true. The larger team that's working on how this might apply to work is an interdisciplinary team that tries to represent those other cues. So there's nothing deterministic about the psychology of that. I mean, you can get to the results from another route.
Yes, yeah, I understand there's multiple room here, but the question is what advantages can you get of the psychological start that you wouldn't get from a social start?
Okay. My answer to that is you would get answers that are hard to talk about, hard for people to be introspective about. So knowing, for example, that the fun, so you ask, why do people play these games? We've got lots of students who we've got a graduate student, Nick Yee, who's interviewed online over 30,000 people about why they play these games. And they will tell you stories, all sincere, interesting as hell, about things that occur to them, about how they meet people they really like, and you just wouldn't get any answer from that method about primitive responses to engaging visuals and to the basic forms of interactivity. So I think that's if you look at what is special about the psychological entry into the larger space, that's what's it. That's what I would say. Knowing things that you can't get in an interview, even a guided, structured, social science.
Maybe being able to deal with addiction.
Absolutely. I mean, there are people that say they're addicted, so they're introspective about addiction to these games. But there's also different forms of addiction to visuals that may be very physical and primitive in the same, and really share more with addictions to chemicals than to experience. So I think that's the greatest advantage. Anything else? Yeah, we're right out of time here.
Relate this collaborative effort that's going into building these worlds. When we talk about the economies, bigger Bulgaria, whatever. Related to a project like the building of Linux, open source software, where, again, incredible amount of collaboration. No one is getting paid to do this work. I mean, to build these avatars. No one is being paid to spend 77 hours a week on this thing. And have you begun to think about how that might change the nature of the knowledge economy if collaborative structures where much more cooperative ventures become the center?
Yeah, we could all say in the state of California, let's create a video game that uses IP camera feeds from every nuclear reactor and dam and power structure. And we'll just create a game. We'll put in a bunch of false positives of Osama attacking here, but we'll just engage the hell out of people. And guess what? We'll be able to light some red lights up in somebody's office with some wisdom that you couldn't get any other way. And so we could develop some knowledge of our environment that would be. I mean, you could do it for dastardly things as well. I could be having you redesign the next Corvette, or look at Procter & Gamble's interested in these games, especially the virtual environments, for getting some sense of where people are headed in terms of product development and whatnot. But you definitely could create these knowledge structures on purpose or as an emergent quality, just a really random. I mean, this group of 40 people that are conducting this raid, there's nothing in the game that says who has to be the leader, whether you have to have a leader, how you organize, who goes first. It's just totally an emergent property of the game. And when you show the whole dialogue to somebody at IBM, they say, who is that guy? I want that guy in my company. That guy just organized the hell out of people over the course of a month. He set up his own website. He made some phone calls, in-game IMing. He made people feel bad when they left. He did all the things that I want my next VP to do. I mean, that's a little beyond that, but your point about beyond your question, but your point about these emergent knowledge structures one is really, you'll find out some things and have some ways of knowing that that are not actually designed on purpose.
One last question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
No, you study. He doesn't study games. You study games. You ask a question.
I just study games too.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just teasing.
So, okay, maybe we can both of us can ask questions.
I'll talk fast. Go.
Okay, just make it quick. I understand that your purpose of presentation is about arousal. So, but I'm curious. In all those studies about games, did you measure variables related to balance? So, positive or negative variation of games. And I also noticed that in one experiment, you measured the sense of presence. And I also did some very similar experiments. I found that sense of presence mediates people's balance judgment.
Yeah.
Did you do that kind of?
I haven't been as interested in valence. So this is the two-dimensional space of emotional life where you have aroused to calm, or positive to negative, and aroused to calm, and you can put all these experiences. So say some of the theorists in those two dimensions. I'm mostly interested in activation. So I'm equally interested in erotica and blood and guts because they both have the same arousal level. Okay, but one is positive and one is negative in terms of that experience. Some of the things with news, that was negative valence. There's actually some correlation in those two axes, as you know, as you move out farther on the negative scale, it gets a little bit more arousing, a little bit. So, but most of this stuff is arousal. And what was the second part of that?
The mediating effect of presence.
Yeah. We just haven't. I mean, I know that you've done that. I know Frank Bioka is interested in that. Several other people are interested in asking people their sense of actually being there and presence and the different scales that people have worked on. And I mean, I think it's a great thing to look at, but I don't really know how that correlates with arousal level, whether or not, in fact, your judgment about valence. I don't know on the arousal measures with respect to those, but I mean that's all good stuff. So it's not it's complementary. It's not competitive any. So,
Let me
yeah.
just echo Tom's comment. I also thought this was very interesting, and it's actually amazing to see how similar it is, what you guys do at Stanford with what we do here, without us knowing much about each other.
That's why I'm here.
One thing that really provoked me and turned my arousal level up was your introduction, because you came to understanding the appeal of games by coming along your basic assumption that human communication interaction is very similar to human-human interaction, which, with the equation model and all of that. When you were talking about it, I'm familiar that most of what has been done, also in the area of entertainment and responses to new media, but also to traditional product, basically dwells on the idea that our responses to what is depicted in the media is pretty similar to our responses to what we see in the social environment. At the same time, we know that the fact that people are aware to some extent that it is mediated changes their response. And presence is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
People have a sense of presence, which means they feel like it would be a real environment, but their responses to it are different because it is mediated. It's not the same.
Yeah.
People would not feel suspense if they didn't know that this is, not real.
Yeah.
People wouldn't have the same, level of fun killing somebody if they didn't know it wasn't real. So, while it is similar, at the same time, it is also very clear somewhere in people's minds that this is something very, very different. And it's because it's mediated, it's because it's fictional, it's because it's not real, and it does change, and it does mediate people's responses to it. I'm just wondering how you actually reconcile these two notions.
Well, so there's a funny story about that in the naming of the book, The Media Equation. Cliff and I have very different personalities. I'm a kind of a sometimes personality, and Cliff is an always personality. He's just, white and black, and gray is kind of. And yes, there are differences. You can sit and you can be. I can have my heart rate and brain waves and skin conductance just jarred substantially by a movie. And I can also sit there and reevaluate in real time what's going on and say, wait a minute, this is only a movie. Calm down. Special effects, blah, blah, blah. Calm down. It's only a movie. It's only a movie. And I can change the course of that arousal level. So it is a sometimes. When we were originally doing this, we were really trying to press the point about the similarities, not about the differences. I mean, I think in 1990, 95, the differences were substantial. Now, in media, with respect to media richness and the levels of interactivity and whatnot, I think the similarities are a little bit more obvious, and the differences are also. So, so having said that, I grant what you said. It is, but you said very, very, very one time different. Yeah, and I would challenge that. There are some. So I'm not going to let this computer marry my sister. Okay, that's stupid, and so it's not a real person.
Let's say the emotional responses and reactions. I want to give you an example. If you look into the older literature that was looking at structural features and how they elicit certain reactions, like in the tradition of Daniel Golein, right, where a medium level of complexity and surprise and novelty pleases people the most.
Yes.
This changes once people know that they can control it. They are willing, we all are willing to accept a much higher level of surprise, curiosity, novelty, and so on, if we know we can actually control it. So in a sense, we feel that we are, it depends on us, and therefore we respond differently. We are not aware of that. If you ask people, they wouldn't tell you. But, it changes us, and this actually corresponds very well with your studies that show that if people are in control, there's something different going on. While people might be in front of a screen or playing a game, they might not know that, it is different from reality, but at some level, they do feel it, and they respond differently because of that, feeling and sense of having it.
What would be an example of a response that would happen in the game?
Level of joy, having less fear, taking much greater risks. I mean, people in games take much greater risk. In the end, I might feel afraid of being shot, but if I'm shot, what the heck? I try it again. That changes my level of risk taking.
No, that's true. I mean, gender bending in real life is a pretty tough gig, where it's pretty easy in the game, and so you might take risks. But also, I would think, and I would also say that even if I show up in the game as a 16-year-old girl, which is easy enough to do, I think fundamental aspects of emotional response and personality and language use and whatnot would be similar. They would be hard to change. So yes, there would be differences, and it is interesting. One of the interesting things about choosing a character and constructing a character is that ability to take risk with language and whatnot. But they're very conscious risks, and you may default back, when you into more familiar forms of interaction when you get tired or you get more familiar with those. But yeah, there's some things that aren't the same, and some real abilities to stretch. But these responses, I think, would still occur. So, a lot of them would still occur. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.